Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Imperial Holonet. I'm JID123.
And I'm Nero Cole.
Red isn't here right now. Maybe he'll be able to join us for this conversation. If he comes later, we are here to discuss something, a little theory I like to call the Hierarchy of Mediums. Now, what is this? Where did I come up with this name? Is this just
You're the one
me?
who came up with this, Joel.
Exactly. Well, have you ever noticed, Cole, that people tend to take things more seriously if they're in a certain medium than if they are in another thing and not really judging it by its story?
Yes.
Well, I've come to a conclusion just by looking at just the general populace at large. No, not people like us, but your average schmoes,
hmm
your average people. That we have a hierarchy. I feel of be it of franchises, movies, stories, what have you. And whatever that franchise, movie or not movie story form it, whatever form it takes, it will either be more really popular or very niche. And I feel like this
Yeah.
is the hierarchy: movies, television, books, and then finally comics. And I guess video games are in a weird place,
Yeah. Video games in a very weird, bizarre place.
pretty much.
Um, well, I'm going to start this off by saying, don't you think that hierarchy changes going from person to person?
What do you mean?
I
No, I
mean,
mean I'm talking more on the general
in the
consensus.
general. But just to branch off of that, I think when it comes to a hierarchy about what people take more seriously than other things, I think they value what they know the most over most other things. Like I would say Red would probably much rather read a comic than he would watch a movie. And that's not the case for every single person, but
I mean,
it
yeah,
varies from
obviously from
person to person.
I definitely would agree that it does vary from person to person, but I think overall, just the subconsciousness of our culture, especially in America,
Yeah.
um, we have that hierarchy pretty much takes that form.
Yeah.
And I'm going to go
Whereas in
to.
places
Oh, so yeah.
Whereas in places like Japan, manga and anime is the be and end all. That is their hierarchy. Everything else pretty much comes after that. That is their be and end all.
Right, and I also think this also affects sort of how much. I want to use the word relevance a franchise can take.
Yeah.
And I'm actually going to use an example that I don't talk about much. I'm going to talk about Godzilla. So, history time. So, after 2005, Godzilla Final Wars came out, and I think it was to celebrate the 50th anniversary, and they were going to take a long retirement. Just how some franchises to take the hiatus after a while. They
Yeah.
don't. But here's the thing about franchises: franchises don't die; they live on. Especially the smart ones, they live on in some form or another. And
Yeah.
for a long time, Godzilla lived on, mostly in comics. There's a bunch of really good IDW comics. Um, Out there. If you ever go see one in your bookstore, go pick them up. I especially recommend Godzilla: The Half Century War if you really want to learn about Godzilla but don't want to watch a Godzilla movie. That's probably the one to go to. Um, and now that I'm done plugging for Godzilla: Half Century War, back to my point. But for a long time, Godzilla was kind of out of the spotlight. I mean, it kind of the fan base kind of dwindled, I guess, except for the people who just stuck with the comics, or of course, just like talking about classic Godzilla films. I mean, we have like 25, or is it 30? I always forget. I think it's 30 actually, or was it 29 by that time? But anyway, off my point. My point being is that not until Godzilla 2014 came around, which is the Americanized film directed by Gareth Edwards, made by Legendary Pictures, is when you started to finally see Godzilla come back to
Into the
relevance
public eye.
into the public eye, relevance again. I mean, not like an explosion because
Right.
Godzilla monster films are always kind of gonna be niche. I mean, not
Yeah.
niche, but they're gonna have a select
They're
fan.
always going to be. They're always going to have some form of popularity, just not as big as some of the others.
Yeah, Pacific Rim I also think helped sort of repopularize the
Yeah, I agree.
genre, and then Godzilla was kind of the next step, especially just in terms of making Godzilla popular again. And I felt one of the big reasons for that was because Godzilla's getting a movie, and let's face it, movies get more attention than books and
Yeah.
comics. Sad but true. I mean, those comics are really good, and I would have to argue. I mean, I love Godzilla 2014, but I think some of the Cap Century were probably a better story. I mean, I can't argue because they're 2014 kind of doing its own thing while staying true to Godzilla, so it's kind of hard to make a judgment call on that. But
Let me bring this up though.
it's maybe more
Is it
popular.
not that well, let's face it, most things fade out of the public eye after some form or time. So the hierarchy is subject to change from time to time, even in the subconscious of people today. I mean,
I would argue that, especially in terms of like a movie franchise goes on forever. I mean,
yeah,
I hate to say this, but maybe one day Marvel will finally, well, Marvel, like the hype around Marvel varies depending on what movie's coming out. But I still, well, we'll get into superheroes later. But in terms of just a
yeah,
movie franchise in general, eventually, like, I don't know what the next Mission Impossible film is. I don't even like Mission Impossible, but that's a
yeah.
different story.
It's very this is a hard topic to tackle just in the sense that you're always going to get people who disagree with you, but they also really can't disagree with some of the points being made here. I mean, things
I'm
fade out
not
of the
saying
public
that a
conscious.
story. I'm saying, I mean, in a perfect world, everything would be judged just based on the story
Of course.
and the quality and merits of the story. But we don't live in that world. We live in a world where people, I think, overall, in a general sense, I'm not speaking to us or our friends or the people we know individually. I'm just talking about the general public consensus that we have a hierarchy.
Yeah.
So continue, Cole. You had a point. I think I interrupted you.
Trying to remember. Basically, what I was going to say was things fade out of the public conscious, so it's subject to change. But there, do you think it's possible that we might see some of these mediums leave the public well, yeah, we'll see more things enter this conscious depending on what new mediums become available. So it's always seeing what shifts, what comes in and takes over certain spots, and whether or not like movies will stay as. I think. Let me ask you this, Joel. This is not too digress, but let me ask you this: do you think we'll ever see a day where movies fade out of the public medium to some degree?
No, I think movies are going to forever be somewhat special, especially just the idea of going to the theater and being in a room in a stadium on a large screen watching a thing, because you can never truly get rid of that special feeling of seeing something in a theater comparing to watching something on TV. I mean, I'm
That's
watching Star Wars on TV, and that's fun, but sadly it's on full screen. Some channels actually do use the widescreen, but I
yeah.
mean, it can never truly capture what seeing something in a theater will be is like.
But then there's always the question of what if something better comes and gives you an even better feeling? I mean, technology is improving at such a fast rate. It's hard not to go to that place to kind of think about what if something outdates the theater. And I agree with you to some degree that nothing's ever going to replace the theater in itself. But I wonder if there won't be a better medium for movies that just hasn't come along yet. And that's the other thing we should point out too. These mediums may evolve into something even beyond what they even had even perceived the being. So it's hard to even tackle it then because history changes day in and day out, and the more things change, the more they stay the same. So it's hard to really know what's going to stay the same and what's going to move forward and become the next big thing and even to go further up in the hierarchy.
Yeah, I mean that's true, and then you can also add in subdivisions. I mean, I said
Yeah.
television, but then like what kind of television are we talking about? Animated, I mean, and then movies, but then you're talking about animated movies. Like animated movies don't get enough press, and I think they should nowadays. Sadly,
Yeah.
animated TV shows don't get enough press, even though in some cases they're the best things on. Uh, Shots
I
fired,
hate
but I think so. And then of
I hate
course,
to even. Oh,
then,
go ahead, Joel.
then you have streaming like Netflix, of course, versus
Hmm.
cable, which obviously streaming is Netflix is the better. At least right now in terms of quality. I mean, not saying there's nothing good on cable, but still. And then of course with movies, you got your R-rated movies, your blockbusters, your franchises, your indie films, that sort of thing.
And I hate to even bring this up. We live in a time and place where where the general human consensus has changed dramatically. I mean, the way we act today wasn't the same as what people necessarily believed in like a couple of decades ago. So cultural norms have changed to the point where these days we don't take in entertainment and mediums the same way we used to, where we used to revel at every detail and marvel at all the little things that make up a movie or a story or anything like that. I hate to say this about my generation, but our generation is very, what's the word, help me out here, Joel.
I'm not going to use the word lazy because I don't think we are. Uh,
No, no, I don't think lazy is the proper word. I think we're a little more accelerated.
oh, that's a better word. Yeah, we like things fast. I mean, I love things fast. I mean,
Yeah, and
I
I
will.
had a
I mean, like that with movies too. I would rather watch a fast-paced, explosions movie than a long slog any day.
yeah, and I got a little perspective from I took a
With a few
a film
exceptions, like
yeah
actually a few exceptions.
I took a film appreciation class last summer, and that's the point he basically made is that his generation, he's like probably in his late 50s. He says we used to and take in our entertainment with every detail. Today's generation doesn't do that. They expect things moving across the screen. They expect the information coming in at a very fast rate. And there are exceptions to the rule. We can, as both you and I can attest to. But
A lot of them is actually like the classic Star Wars films. I mean, I still love A
yeah,
New Hope, but I still love Empire. Empire's a bit faster paced, I think, or just better paced. Um, I like Citizen Kane. That's a pretty long, slow paced film. Godzilla is a pretty well paced short film though, not that long. Uh, Sorry.
but it's just it really. I think one of the big points to this whole concept is just today's generation, and that's going back to my earlier point. Something of how things are evolving. Years from now, I hate to think what future generations are and their entertainment is going to be like. I can't even fathom the thought of what that's going to be like.
We're already seeing it. It's called virtual reality. That's gonna be the next best thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's all online, people.
It's gonna happen. We're all gonna get stuck in a MMO, and I'm gonna be the first one to die. It's, I won't survive 5 minutes. Especially if they have giant spiders. Oh.
Yes.
They always do.
So
Go back to some points. One thing I want to talk about is like I mentioned this earlier. Whatever in terms of franchises, I feel like whatever form a franchise takes will sadly not like people won't care about the quality of the stories. They'll care more about what the franchise form is taken first. And I'm not saying that about everybody, obviously, but I feel like
explain that a little more in detail.
okay, so you know how today superheroes are like the most mainstream thing ever.
Yes.
Like everybody, I think knows the Marvel heroes by now. People always kind of knew Batman and Superman, but they're kind of their own thing. They've always kind of
Yeah.
been in the side. They've always kind of been their own thing for years.
Yeah.
Um, Captain America. I mean, to be fair, people knew about superheroes, but they kind of in the '40s and they kind of waned in and out.
Hmm.
But people know about superheroes now because of the movies, especially Marvel. We'll go to Marvel as the best example. Like people care about the Marvel characters because of the film, but at least the people I know, like. But if you asked, I think if you would go around just to get off your online forums and go to your neighbors and ask them about Marvel, they'll talk about the movies, especially if they've seen them. Because
Yeah.
ask them about the comics and they know nothing.
Yes.
Another example, and I kind of wish Red were here. Um, Star Wars, I think, also kind of had this after Revenge of the Sith, but before Clone Wars. Not to say anything against the EU. EU is great. Lots of great stories and books. Games too, definitely. But
Hmm.
I just tend to notice now people, not if you get off the online forums and just stick to the
Yeah.
real world. Get off the internet bubble. Obviously, if you go to the internet bubble, obviously people are gonna know everything about the EU and stuff like that. For the most part, you still find
Yeah.
trouble. But if you go like just your neighbors, your friends in college, they know more about. They're into Star Wars now because of the movies. You ask them something about Thrawn, Old Republic, EU stuff, Quinlan Voss, they probably won't have any idea what you're talking about. Though I do think except for like this weird subsection of fans that kind of started when the Clone Wars 2008 series came along. I feel like we
Yeah.
have like an entire subsection of fans who came in through Clone Wars, and there were a lot of people who came in through Clone Wars. I feel, especially a lot of the podcasters I listen to,
Yeah, it's basically
because it's
whatever
a TV
anybody's
series,
exposed.
and
Yeah, but it's whatever anybody's exposed to.
well, exactly. But certain mediums get exposed more than others.
Exactly.
Comics and books, sadly, don't. And the last time I think we had a big book series that really got exposure was, well, okay, Twilight, but I'm gonna go back farther.
Yeah.
Harry Potter. I don't think anything
Yeah.
really. I mean, yeah, the Twilight Saga, kinda. Well, Harry Potter I felt was a bigger thing than Twilight.
And Lord of the Rings too.
Oh yeah, Lord of the Rings, but that was like 50 years ago. Well, Lord of the Rings was always was big, I guess.
Yeah. Well, that's a weird story in of itself, but it's kind of weird that you see this respect and disrespect among fans and casual fans, whatever, and there's a weird blur between casual and hardcore fan, especially when you get into what mediums they're exposed to. There are whole debates about what makes a fan, whether you like everything or just whether you like good stories for the sake of good stories or you just like it because that's what you grew up with. It's very
I don't
it almost
Oh, sorry.
it almost feels like a privilege thing almost. Like they feel privileged to be knowledge. They feel privileged to talk about the things that they know. But then when someone else comes in knowing a bit more about something that they weren't fully exposed to, it becomes a whole big debate and battle. It's
I
just a
think
very
that more
weird
just depends
phenomenon.
if you're just a jerk or not. I mean,
Yeah, but you
you
can't
could.
deny that there are some
Oh yeah,
that there even among people who are not such jerks that there are still battles among people who just take all this stuff to heart. Because let's face it, we as a community, we like to take things to heart a little too much.
oh yeah. But I feel like this is his own discussion on fandom in general. But yeah, that's definitely true.
Yeah, so
I mean, another example is like for me, I know the things I know about the DC universe through things like Justice League and Brave and the Bold. Like, if you wanted to name two series that like really got me into DC universe, it was the Justice. It was okay. I'm just gonna say the DC animated universe as a whole, and Batman Brave and the Bold. Like those were the two things. Like I knew about the Blue Beetle through Brave and the Bold. I didn't know anything about the comics because I didn't read the comics.
right.
That I was although, and I feel like I'm guilty of some of this hierarchy stuff myself.
I think we all are to some
I
extent.
mean, I will always prefer a movie to a book. I don't
Yeah.
like to read a novel. I'm not a big fan of reading novels. I like novels. I mean, you know how much I love the Thrawn trilogy, and that's something. And I don't know why those three books tend to be really special to me, and I can easily read them compared to some other things.
And
Um,
don't you agree that there seems to be a general consensus among companies, at least some companies, to make some of the stuff that not everybody was exposed to more accessible to get that stuff out there because they're like, hey, it sells, so let's get more people invested in it.
yes, and I definitely think. I think to a perhaps to a consensus point of view, one could argue a movie is more accessible than a book is, and
Yeah.
I mean, I, I would argue that. A
And
book.
yeah, I think that's a good argument. Not might be the most solid argument, but
I
I think with
I'm not saying
today's
story. I mean, I'm
yeah,
not
not
saying.
story wise, but I mean, books are always going to have certain things have an edge on movies, and movies are always going to have certain edges on books. So
That's
it's kind
true.
of
Books are the oldest form of storytelling, apart from just.
which is which is what Captain Logan, which is what bunch of reviewers I think say nowadays is when you watch something, could it work as another medium? And if it would it work better under that medium? Because if it could, then it probably wasn't meant for the medium it's being told in. So it's also a very strange case of I think people sometimes get the wrong message or more wrong vibe hate to say the word vibe, but get the wrong vibe when it comes to a bunch of franchises that maybe the medium just wasn't meant for. Like, wouldn't you agree that maybe there would be certain things in certain mediums that would work better as maybe like a comic?
Yes, I definitely would agree with that. It was funny you brought this up because when me and Ian were doing the Plagueis review, to be fair, Star Wars works in all mediums. I think for the most part. James Luceno does get a little too wordy with his prose, but Ian said, perhaps that some of those problems with the prose, because it kind of got a little wordy, especially exposition-y, to a little too extreme for me, and with
Yeah.
me at least. He said it would have worked better as a comic because then you kind of can just visually tell that story or those expositional scenes. And I even another Star Wars reviewer by the name of Antoine felt that even though he likes the books too, he felt overall Star Wars worked better apart from movies, obviously, in terms of comics and maybe video games as well. Um, I myself I like the novels, and they're all good novels. Like I remember the Thrawn trilogy, Labyrinth of Evil was really good. I remember that one. I remember reading Dark Lords, Star Wars Rise of Darth Vader. Yeah, I think that's one. I like Bloodline as well. Um, but I like the comics. But even as a kid, before the reboot and everything, I always collected more Star Wars comics. Like I used to have a bunch of Star Wars comics, and I liked those over the novels more. And just because I got the story and I got a visual medium, and maybe that's just my bias towards it.
And isn't there also there could be arguments made for cases where people try to merge different mediums together, not in the sense of concocting a new idea, but in the sense of connecting a shared universe together. And I have a feeling with the Marvel universe now, I have a feeling we might be seeing that a lot more. I mean, Star Wars had that to a degree, and now with Marvel doing that, I think that's the
Star
next.
Wars at the Pros, the multimedia project. We've been doing it for years.
Yes,
We got his
but
dang.
I think now we might see more of that in the future.
So far, the only studio that I've ever seen do a multimedia project is Star Wars. I mean, even Marvel we kind of have to admit now Marvel doesn't really care about its TV division,
Yeah.
even though Daredevil's really
Marvel's
good.
yeah, Marvel's kind of a
Both of
weird
them.
case because even they don't even connect any of as far as I know, they don't connect much of their movies to comics. I mean, yes, they're based off comics, but I mean connect them to actual comics. There are some exceptions, but
No, they
no,
don't. They really don't.
exactly.
Nobody's gonna mention the Avengers fought Ultimo in that one preview comic.
Yeah, so it's
Ezra
very
from Rebels had a better chance of appearing in Episode 8 than Ultimo does in that comic with Ultimo in a Marvel movie.
it just varies from situation to situation whenever you talk about different mediums, especially with books, comics, and movies. There are always going to be exceptions to the rules. Of course, we've seen it time and time again. But have you not noticed? Back to I hate to go back to the fan thing, but it's also kind of relating back to the hierarchy. Is that you see that respect among people in daily life? Like I've from what I've seen, is that when some people tell like their family that they read comics, they get like these weird looks.
I've never gotten that from my family, but they don't
Well, I've
care.
always
They don't care what I read as long as I'm not doing anything bad. In
exactly.
fact, my mom's
It's
actually quite
always,
respectful of the comics.
but you have to admit there are some cases where that's not always the case.
Oh yeah, I mean, I've met some strangers and stuff like that, but in my personal
So
life, I've never had to deal with that. My mom knows I like comics and that they can be legitimate forms of storytelling.
yeah, it just depends on how open-minded people are, and I'm glad I got to that. I think that's a big issue with our generation and this topic is we're not nearly as open-minded as we could be.
Really, I have always thought it'd be the older generations that weren't as open-minded in terms of
Well, I think an argument can be made to degrees. I think in some cases we are open-minded, but in a lot of other cases we aren't so much.
I
And I
need a good
think it's
example. I need a good example. Can you think of one?
uh,
Can you think of a good example?
well, think of the multimedia projects.
That's
Think of multi and those expanding outwards, like Marvel doing comic deals with their movies, and people maybe telling their kids, "Hey, you like these movies? Get into that." So, do you see what I'm saying, though?
I guess. I don't know. I mean, I think Star Wars is a better example of using multimedia projects because
Yeah,
that's what we do. We've been doing
yeah,
this.
but they're all. But here's a good idea. Here's a good point. Is that people really? You have the sect of fans who really resist getting into the books,
Oh
and then
yeah, yep, that's true.
that's a very good
And
point.
some people just don't like to read. I mean, I have to
Exactly.
admit, I don't like reading much myself. I'm a slow reader. I get distracted. I get kind of, just I can read. I mean, if it's a really good book, obviously, I think I can read it. But even then, if it's still really good, I mean, I love the Thrones really. But even then, like when I'm reading it, kind of get distracted, kind of just start to
Yeah.
skim. Like, okay, let's get to the Thrawn part now.
And I
Uh,
think it just comes to a point that we resist certain things from our lives influence us to resist. So, and that in turn makes us not as open minded to the possibilities that certain mediums have, and therefore not as much respect to certain mediums because they haven't seen what they can truly dish out.
oh yeah, I mean, obviously, especially when it comes to multimedia projects, we're gonna have fans who just watch the movies, and then we're gonna have
Yeah.
some, and then obviously there are gonna be people who do everything. Maybe people watch the movies and see the comics. Um, I think when it comes to multimedia projects that involve movies, I think the movies have to play a key component.
Yeah.
Because that's kind of what you're all building around here,
Yeah.
people. Um, TV, I think TV is like second tier. Like it never beats out the movie, but I think it
I
still gets
agree.
more press.
Yeah, and the interesting thing about TV these days is we're starting to see a time, especially with Netflix and Hulu and all these streaming devices, where TV is starting to become the more accessible thing instead of movies. And let's be honest, movies these days, the prices have been hacked up. They are nowhere near as cheap as they were back in the days during the Great Depression, because that's what everybody did in the Great Depression. They went and saw movies because they could afford it.
Well, it was a Great Depression. I don't think a lot of them could afford. Actually, no, they could still afford it. That was the one thing they still could afford.
Yeah, that
Uh,
was one thing they still could afford, but that's the thing. Movies, I would make the argument that movies these days aren't nearly as accessible as you could get TVs, where you could just pay a couple dollars a month and stream them from home and have hundreds and hundreds of different TV shows at your disposal and movies. So, in that regard, movies are even more accessible, but you don't get that same feeling. So, it's a very weird case
I
scenario.
think when it comes to movie, it just depends as if the movie's good. I mean,
Yeah.
this is the year where we had both Batman and Superman versus Superman and Civil War, and
Yeah.
one of them was bad and people hated it. One of them was amazing, everybody loved it. So it's sort of like I think that just more depends on is the movie good. If it's good, people will see it.
Well, even if it's bad, but no, I don't agree with that though, because with Star Wars back in the day, I mean, say what you will, and I'm going to get a lot of hate for saying this. Say what you will about the prequels, they weren't nearly up. They weren't near as. Let me try to rephrase this. The prequels are very different from the original trilogy, and they still got a lot of bad press, but people
That,
still went to see them.
actually, fun fact. Uh, there was everybody tells me this, so I guess I should reiterate. There was a moment. There was like a 6 months. Everyone says 6 months. There was a period of time after Phantom Menace where like everybody loved it. Like if you actually went back and watched those early reviews, people loved those films, and then they
Mm-hmm.
started to dwell on them. Oh wait, maybe there's a problem. There's a problem. There's a problem. And some of those legitimate problems. Some of them are not so they're more like silly nitpick problems.
Yeah.
I guess honestly, I'm gonna Rogue One's gonna be the test for me if people hated the prequels just because they were different and not because they weren't. Well, let's hope Rogue One's a good movie. First,
Yeah.
and just because they were just different and not because they were, they had problems. Um,
Yeah, but I hate to bring up this example, but with a case like Batman v Superman and Suicide Squad and all those movies, I
those
mean
weren't those weren't good
those movies
movies.
weren't good, but people still go to see them. I mean, with Batman v Superman, and
Well,
Captain Logan always makes this point that people kind of had to. It was Batman v Superman. I mean, people felt obliged that they had to go see this because it had been anticipated for so long. But then Suicide Squad came around. I guess the big test for this
well,
will be
Suicide
what
Squad. I
happens
think
with.
I can see why people would want to see Suicide Squad. It's so weird and it has Joker, so it's like Joker, and they did
Yeah,
have
but then
Joker.
but I think that my point is it seems to be a style over substance thing.
Oh well, yeah. I mean, style is. very important. I think I people I love. I mean, substance is very important, but I feel like we don't
Yeah.
have style.
If you don't have style, then the story can be that you're shown can be very bland.
Exactly.
An author needs to have their own style to differentiate themselves and to draw people in. Because without a style, why am I reading? I'm just because I'll make this point that Captain Logan made, and that is all the great stories have been told, and originality comes in finding new and inventive ways in telling them, and that in part comes with style.
I'll make a point. Rasco made in terms of shot competition. I mean, yeah, having a story for a movie is great and important, and scripts are important. People, story and substance is great and all, and that's very important. I'm not dissing it. But if you don't have an interesting way of shooting your film, lighting, sound, music, then why make it a movie? I should just be able to read it as a book.
Yeah,
Make it a book, um, or a comic. But even then, you have to have good art for your comic.
yeah.
I feel like if you just want story, that's what the book's for.
I think back to this hierarchy thing, bringing that back. Let me ask you this, Joel. Do you think maybe some of why we don't see as much respect for certain mediums is due to ignorance?
Oh yeah, I mean, ignorance is going to play a part in everything, no matter what happens.
Yeah, but
But
more
I also
so in
think
the sense.
I think
Keep
some of
going,
it's
keep going.
ignorance, but I think a lot of it's just the culture that we've lived in for so long.
Yeah, I agree.
I mean, obviously, people are just ignorant about people. I mean, you're gonna find people who say, "Oh, comics are kid stuff," and
Yeah.
"Oh, I don't like reading." Like I know,
And you're gonna find people who say anime is all tits and ass, and I can be first, and I will tell you, people, it is not just tits and ass.
it's also blood and guts and gore. Um, but no,
Yeah.
no, it can be really good. I've
Yeah.
seen a lot of the good stuff. Well, anime is one of those things where there's an anime for everything.
Just like they said, there's a porn for everything, but that's a different story. But
But there is.
rules of the internet, people learn them. But
Exactly, but also, uh, where was I going with this? I was going somewhere with this.
I knew you were. I was prepared for that. Whatever
Oh yeah,
epic
yeah,
point
yeah.
you were going to make. Oh, there you go.
Bringing it back to the hierarchy, I wanted to add just again reiterate. Sometimes though I mean, just because we have a hierarchy and they're relevant to franchises, I also think like having multiple mediums is important, obviously, because
Yeah.
it keeps a franchise alive in some way or
And
another.
plus, competition keeps more franchises coming up. That allows change and for more franchises to take the top and allowing further other franchises to blossom.
Exactly. I'd like to go back to something we started with. I hope we're not going in circles. But
We'll let them decide that. But
you said that the hierarchy doesn't always affect or doesn't always equate to things losing interest. Like
uh,
if let's use Mission Impossible as an example because I don't care about that franchise. Um,
yeah,
I think they're still making Mission Impossible movies, are they?
yeah,
I mean, when it started, I'm sure people were hyped and ooh, Mission Impossible, Mission Impossible. But now it's sort of like I'm sure there a lot of people go see them if they're good, but I don't see as
yeah,
much massive hype for it anymore. Or
yeah. And
maybe I'm just ignorant. I don't know. Maybe Mission Impossible is doing wonderful. I don't know.
well, maybe to add to your point, Joel, to the point I think you're getting to is when you get a lot of big franchises and you've seen them over and over again, it isn't necessary. It's kind of in the sense that you've lost interest, but it's also the case of you've seen a certain type and it's just different plot line. So in that case, you're just seeing a lot of the same visuals, different plot line, but that doesn't equate to much in the long run. You've got to have more than just.
Well, I don't know about those Mission Impossible movies. I mean, for all we know, they could all be one. They could
They
all be
could be,
very
but
different.
isn't that the case though for a couple of different things? Like a lot of people have talked about the superhero movies maybe getting to that place, and the reason they've stayed alive for so long, especially not in large part due to Marvel, but because they've always been able to tell unique and interesting stories and also have different directors come on to give us different visions of what these superheroes can be like.
Yeah, that's a good point. I'm curious to see though if the superhero bubble does burst one day.
Yeah,
Especially with
and that's a different discussion in and of itself, though.
yeah. I have a feeling that even if something does happen, I feel like Marvel's the only studio right now that can wave off any sort of downgrade. Cause just how everyone loves that studio right now in a general consensus kind of way. Uh, Come on, DC, you can do it.
Yeah, you can do a
Great.
DC. You've been
Batman
trying
movie,
3 times.
Batman Affleck film. It's Ben
Come on,
Affleck.
Batfleck, do it. You can do it.
He's a good
Just
writer.
don't kill anybody. Just don't kill anybody.
Exactly. Um,
Well, if you're gonna do it, make it make sense.
yeah, exactly.
Well, not that it makes sense.
Make it worth
Make it
something.
not morally ambiguous. Well, I'm
Exactly.
just digging myself in the hole here. Forget what I said.
Yeah, no, never mind. Not morally. Make it worth something. Make it part of. Make it.
Yeah, make it worth something. That's what I was trying to say.
But yeah, I don't know. I feel like we're running out of things to say, but I definitely would agree. I definitely would argue that the general consensus among the culture we live in is a hierarchy.
Yeah,
Um, I hate to be the pessimist and kind of a downer, but sound like I'm being judgmental. But you have to admit, I feel like you could talk about the greatest comic book story ever. You could say it's the greatest story in the world, best story ever told. It's better than Lord of the Rings, better than whatever the greatest movie is in
yeah.
the world, better than Citizen Kane. This is like Citizen Kane's time too, but it's in a comic book, and because it's in a comic book, people don't really care.
Yeah.
Like it's like, how many people know about Sandman? The thing that makes
I don't really know about Sandman.
I don't either, but I know it's emotional. It makes people cry. Um,
Yeah.
and yet people will talk about like general. I guess I'll use let's see, what can I use an example? I use Sandman. People won't talk about Sandman, but the minute they make Sandman into a movie, that's when it'll get popular in terms of general
Yeah.
consensus among just apart from just the core fans.
It's kind of a holier than thou type thing among the general consensus, and not even like that, but it's more of
I
a
don't think it's holier than now. I just don't think people just don't care.
well, it's almost a sense. Well, it's kind of in the sense that they don't care, and why should I care?
I would, I guess I can. I mean, I can't agree with that, but I can definitely understand. I mean,
I don't agree with that either. I think that's kind of
naive.
a dick move and our
Oh,
general consensus, but you have to agree that is among our generation. That is
I think
the
not just.
general.
I don't think it's just among our generation. I think all generations, or at least the ones that kind of, at least the ones that started with movies, grew up with movies. I don't want to just
I think
equate
I
it to our
think it's the
generation. I want
case of we fear change. I think it's the whole thing of we fear change too. That can be brought into this a little bit. They fear of going into a new medium. I think to some degree because it's not what they're used to.
I can argue it's just not what we're used to. I just also argue that people like to see things. I think it's also just a visual thing. I mean, I'm
Yeah,
gonna make this argument. I like seeing things over reading things. I
yeah,
would like. I guess I'll use this. I'll use this example. I'd rather see a lightsaber duel than read about one in a book. And I'm sure that there are great authors out there. I mean, I trust me. When you try to write Star Wars fan fiction like I do, I have to. I'm trying to think hard of how do I actually write a lightsaber duel and make it interesting. Because
right.
I'm not a poet with my words. Um,
Yeah.
I would rather just see, like, I can imagine it in my head, the lightsabers moving and how, the bodies move and all that stuff.
But even among the general consensus, I think even among movies, there's still a whole consensus of how that medium gets produced the way it does. A lot of people don't care about that either. They don't care. They just care about going out on a Friday night, have a little bit of money on them. They see a movie they think looks interesting and seeing it, enjoying it for the hour or two that it's on, it fading from memory for about after about a couple of hours, and then moving on with their day. I mean, people. I think even among a general consensus, they not everybody truly appreciates the mediums as a whole. I mean, that's not always the case for everybody, but I think an argument could be made for that case.
Yeah. Like I'll use this. I'll use Star Wars as an example again. After Force Awakens came out, my Model UN club just they seemed like they were obsessed with that film. I mean, they just talking about it and talking about it. They one classmate even brought got the DVD and brought it to the class, and we were just watching it and goofing off throughout during that club meeting, the entire time. Um, but I feel like nobody was talking like. But I felt like when I was growing up, because I vaguely remember the post Return of the Sith, or like even the Clone Wars era to a certain extent, when that show was on. That little bubble in time before Force Awakens was the thing. Where I felt like either nobody talked about Star Wars. I mean, to be fair, I wasn't part of the internet. I mean, and again, when I talk about this stuff, I'm talking about what's going on outside the internet bubble.
Yeah,
I'm not talking
out of
about like
geek culture.
not in geek culture. In geek culture, you can find plenty of people talking about Star Wars and the latest books coming out
Yeah,
and stuff, and Clone Wars and all that good stuff. But even during Clone Wars, like nobody, I felt like nobody I knew in my vicinity was talking about Star Wars. Even they knew Star Wars, obviously, they knew it was a thing, and of course, because it's Star Wars. I feel like Star Wars is its own unique thing that kind of like I don't think it'll ever truly die. I mean, it's a
yeah.
classic. It's
Well,
the
there's
image
also the
of
case that there's nothing else really like Star Wars, like Dan said.
exactly. So it's like, like prequel trilogy, original trilogy, what have you. Those films are never going to die, and people are going to go back and watch them because they are, Americana classics. Especially A New
Yeah,
Hope, like that's kind of like a film that changed the generation. For filmmaking, it's part of the history books. But before Force Awakens, and I'm not saying to defend Force Awakens or attack Force Awakens or what have you. I'm just using this as a general example. Nobody was talking about Star Wars. Like, I mean, I would see a Star Wars shirt every now and then, but like nobody I felt like talked about it. Like it wasn't a thing anymore. I mean, maybe it wasn't a thing. That's not a good term, but it wasn't. It didn't penetrate the masses.
right.
And then after Force Awakens, like I went to my university yesterday. I felt like three people wearing Star Wars shirts walking in a row. Another guy wearing a Star Wars shirt, and it's sort of like just keep seeing all this merchandise. Like you can always tell if something is more popular by just the merchandising. And I'm not saying more popular means better storytelling or less worse storytelling. I'm just
Yeah,
saying in terms of consensus and popularity,
yeah,
obviously. But yeah, that's because
yeah,
there was a movie.
yeah, yeah. I think we've pretty run the gambit on this pretty well. We've had a lot to say on this, actually.
Yeah, yeah, I don't know. It's one of those things you notice. And again, in the perfect world, we would judge based on storytelling and not on
Yeah.
mediums.
But of
Obviously,
course, we don't live in that world. We live in the world where people have to justify something's existence based on the money they have, which, to be fair, has some has there is some truth to that. I mean, everybody has to make decisions with their wallet, so not every good thing gets to be seen these days because people not only do they not have the time
to be fair, I
or
think
the
a comic
money.
book was less expensive than a movie.
Yeah,
But and everybody has, of course, their biases and
yeah,
just their traits. I mean, again, I've said this before. I'm not a big fan of reading novels. I like novels. I have novels. I've read novels, but I just don't. I really lack that sort of that.
that's just not your medium.
No, it's not my medium. But it's also just sort of like I just don't have a good attention span for it, and I would rather
Right.
watch a movie, or a TV show any day. Like and obviously, I've learned over the years, to judge, by the storytelling, but still,
Yeah.
I'd rather watch a movie still. So yeah, that's my final word on it. It's we don't live in that perfect world, and it's just something I think that's important to bring up.
Yep.
So with that out of the way, till next time, I'm GID123.
And I'm Nero Cole telling you, may the force be with you.
Always.